Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex. You can visit at umbrex.com. Today's episode is with Jonathan Paisner. He is an expert on brand architecture, and this we're going to talk about. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey there, Will. It is great to be here. I've been a big fan and listener, and happy to be a part of it.
And I think you are a founding member of Umbrex. I mean, we've known each other for at least, 7, 8 years, a long time.
Yes, indeed. It's good to be here.
Let's start by defining terms. What is brand architecture?
If you ask a handful of people, they might all have somewhat different answers. I think about brand architecture as the way that a company communicates the relationships across the businesses and offerings in their portfolios. So it could be if they could have a portfolio of different business units or different business divisions. It also could be within a given product set, how they sort of organize the products and capabilities within the portfolio.
And backing up even further, how would you define, just so we define terms, how would you define a brand?
That is another one where you'll get a few different answers. So a brand is really, ultimately, it is the promise that an organization, a company is making to the market about who they are, what they represent, what makes them special, and sort of carrying that through, both verbally in what they say and visually in how they represent themselves with their logo and their visual identity, and also the experience that they deliver to their customers and their clients at the end of the day. So all of that is the brand in my mind.
Okay. So brand architecture. Talk to me about and I love the definition about the relationship between business units or relationship between products. Maybe we can start, and I know you mostly do some B2B work. Maybe we can start with some consumer examples just to kind of orient ourselves a bit about what we're talking about with brand architecture.
Sure. I mean, you think about brand architecture, and it does become a way to, it is kind of a window to the overall business strategy of an organization. If you think at the kind of corporate level, where are they looking to build the relationship with their customers? Is it sort of product by product, or is it kind of at a higher, more corporate level? So for examples, you might look at in the consumer world, think about a BMW, right? The BMW cars, they don't really have names. I mean, they have model numbers, and people who are kind of in the know and big fans of BMW will know an X3 to an X7 or whatever all their model numbers are. But really the relationship is to BMW, with the consumer to BMW. And then at the other extreme, you've got something like, let's get out of the car world.
Let's stay in the car world for a minute, because
stay
like
in
Toyota, because Toyota will have the Toyota Sienna. So you're kind of related to Toyota. You're like, oh, I like Toyota, but I also like the Sienna, right? And then within Sienna, there's maybe different models of the XLE or the XL or whatever. So there's sub brands within the Sienna, but you're probably, so that's kind of a two-tier. Or how would you classify that one?
Yeah, so I think that becomes, sort of within the Sienna. Then Sienna has its own sort of architecture of how they talk about the different tiers or the different sort of luxury levels. Ideally, those tiers and luxury levels are consistent within the Toyota world, right? So that if you move from a Sienna to a Camry and it's an XLS and an XLS, those are comparable. So that kind of is that next level down of architecture. But that's right. I mean, I think that you as the consumer, your relationship, GMC is even more diverse probably than a Toyota portfolio, but the same thing, like your relationship is with the car brand, the product brand, as opposed to the manufacturer brand.
And then let's see, I'm not a big car expert, but isn't it, is it the Lexus that is, I mean, is that a Toyota too, or a
Yes,
where they've where they've kind of hidden the Toyota name, like a Toyota Camry, you say Toyota Altima, Toyota Sienna, but but then the Lexus, they're trying to downplay the Toyota name.
Right. And so Toyota, when they first launched Lexus, there was this kind of understanding that you had the reliability of Toyota, but they wanted to sort of upscale it, and they didn't think that they could do that with whatever baggage the Toyota brand had. And so, you saw Honda do the same thing, you saw Nissan do the same thing. And so you have the sort of strength, that sort of engineering reliability at the heart of it, but it allows them to segment the market by creating those very separate brands and experiences.
Okay, and you had some other examples teed up. Like it might be interesting to discuss Procter and Gamble versus Unilever.
Yeah.
Different strategies there.
Yeah, I mean, they're actually not that different. Procter and Gamble and Unilever. Unilever makes themselves a little bit more known to the consumer than Procter and Gamble does. But at the end of the day, they're still. I would look at both of those and call those, a house of brands. They have a whole bunch of products. Each of the products has kind of a clear, kind of positioning, clear value proposition about what they do and who they're targeted towards, and that sort of model can give a company, like either Unilever or a P&G, the sort of flexibility to introduce new brands. They can compete with Their brands can compete with one another potentially, and they can, sort of gain more shelf space at the retailer. But you don't have that same kind of leverage that you might have if you were all one brand. You don't have economies of scale in managing a single brand and building a marketing campaign behind a single brand. You have to build 20 marketing campaigns, and so that's kind of key to some of those trade-offs.
So maybe before we get into the examples in the B&B world and talk about your
Yeah,
work and so forth,
yeah.
are there different like uh, classifications of architectures or taxonomies or flavors, or where you'd say, well, there's kind of okay, well, there's 5 different main approaches, and then there's variations within them. But is there some way we can have some sort of taxonomy to the different brand architectures?
Sure. So though that sort of P&G model that we just talked about, or the GM Toyota model, those are, house of brands model is something that people often talk about. Versus at the other extreme, you've got your BMW. In the B2B world, you might think of an SAP or Cisco systems. They tend to be more of a branded house where it all comes under a single brand, a master brand, a single brand and then the products tend to be more descriptive in nature. So with BMW, you've got your model numbers, but with other brands like like an SAP, they might have very just descriptive names to their products, but at the end of the day, it's all about SAP. And then in between, there are a whole bunch of different kind of hybrid models in there of companies that have, Microsoft, for example, will have a number of Microsoft branded products and divisions, but then they'll also have within their portfolio, they've got their whole kind of gaming portfolio. They've got the Office that has its own kind of setup and architecture. I mean, so you can have a number of just sort of complicated hybrid models that you are juggling across those two extremes.
So maybe now we can turn and give us some case examples of projects that you've worked on, because it sounds very logical after the fact, right? You can look at Toyota and say,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, this all makes sense." But I imagine that when you're actually in one situation, now the strategy changes and you need to change the brand architecture, you run into a lot of trade-offs. So maybe walk us through a case example.
But before if I may,
Of course you
before I
may.
before I
Throw my
do that,
question out the window. Okay,
yeah,
I'm going to answer a
I'm gonna
different question
pivot.
altogether.
I'm gonna take my opportunity to pivot on this, um, because I mean, just to sort of keep it a little just try to play the story out a little bit. I mean, you think about particularly in the B2B world, you think about what the business strategy that a company has and how the architecture can play into that. If you are, if your strategy is to, you're a technology company, for example, and you want to do these kind of roll-ups or bolt-ons, right? Add on new technologies to enable you to broaden your relationship with your customer and able to gain a greater share of wallet. So there, the more kind of brands and names you have, if you're thinking in a P&G mindset, the more brands and names you have, that's going to kind of get in the way of this idea of extending your relationship with the customer, because they're not going to see this sort of seamlessness in their experience, because they're going to have to move from one brand to the next, right? So that's where you get that sort of SAP idea where it's all SAP. If your model is more about wanting to segment the market and think about different specific areas of the market that you want to go into, whether that's by geography or completely different applications of your technology, well, then it makes sense to have different brands there. So, I mean, again, just wanted to sort of color in some of the benefits and trade-offs across that spectrum. Is that helpful?
It is. So, yeah, so why don't you walk us into a case example and maybe tee it up with if it's one that you can kind of share publicly, what was the
Yeah.
situation that you arrived? What was the brand architecture currently, and how is the strategy changing, and what did they call you in to help with?
Sure. There's one that, and I think it's cool to talk about this, so I'm just going to go for it, because this one is kind of it is still evolving. But this is it's a hospital system. It's a company that owns a number of hospitals around the country, predominantly community hospitals and regional hospitals, and some regional systems. The company is called LifePoint Health. And LifePoint has been operating as this portfolio, essentially in this kind of P&G world, for years. They have, a couple hundred different service entities, hospitals, basically, hospitals, outpatient clinics, and all the rest of it that goes with, sort of the doctor practice groups and specialty areas, but all operating under their own brands in different markets around the country. And so here, LifePoint is is kind of managing all these different brands. A lot of that is happening locally, not centrally. But if you think about the management and those branded assets and making sure the right logo's in the right place, that in of itself is a challenge. But they're also missing out on other opportunities in order to, while they do have this kind of common operating platform that exists in the company. There's, best practices that they adhere to throughout all their hospitals, certain just standards of care, standards of behavior that they adhere to throughout the hospitals. That's not reflected in how they communicate externally. They've historically have really kind of kept the ownership and LifePoint in the background there. But what they lose, in addition to having to manage all these different little branded assets, what they lose is the people that are working at the employees of the company, the potential employees of the company. They don't feel the benefit that they are working for this large, meaningful organization. They feel more and more that they are, part of this community hospital, which is a wonderful thing. But there's a different kind of emotional connection to feeling like you're part of this bigger entity, and that is a real challenge, particularly in recruiting in the medical field. I mean, in any fields. And so what we initially started to work with them on is how do they. It was actually separate from this particular issue. This issue came up as we were looking to work with them on how they brand their partnerships and their joint ventures, but then really started to poke at this idea of all these little standalone brands that they have. And it started really to drive us to this solution that took a number of, we began to call it internally the blue dot. We started to represent all of their standalone entities with a blue dot in place of their own logo at the individual hospital in North Carolina, the individual hospital in Michigan, the individual hospital in Tennessee, all having their own brands, started to represent them in this unified way to present this networked system. And so have since just over the past few weeks started to roll out this more unified system with a new mark in place of this blue dot that we've been talking about, but a way to connect their regional and their super regional systems to this bigger, broader national entity. It gives them some competitive scale. There are several other large national hospital brands that they compete with for some of these kinds of resources, human resources in particular, and creating this networked system using the visual identity as kind of a key indicator. And they've already got these kind of operating models and operating principles below it. Was that, if that was a rambling answer, please
No. So
please help me
so it sounds like
target it a little bit better.
so it sounds like there's different stakeholders. So one or different, customer groups or that you're talking to. One is the actual patients in some local area.
Mm-hmm.
And for those patients, they may not particularly care that much. And they might be even wedded or like their local, if it's the community hospital in like Reading, Pennsylvania, and it's the Reading Community Hospital or whatever, that maybe they're not super psyched about getting it to be rebranded as LifePoint Health. I mean, they just have to learn a new name, but they're kind of already know it's not like they're going to go shopping and go to Maryland to that hospital, right? But for the medical personnel, when you're recruiting, it's a different thing. If you say, hey, do you want to join, Geisinger or, like this national well-known brand, you're like, oh, I recognize that. I know people who go, work for this firm somewhere, and has so it's easier on the recruiting side, and to kind of also to drive maybe a consistent, excellent operational excellence across the company. So the branding can be important for the employees as well as for the actual end patients.
Right, and for the patients, the benefit there is to so the way this particular model rolls out, and it's so we didn't take LifePoint Health. They will not be taking LifePoint Health, and that will be the hospital that you'll see down the street. It is really about building these local community, maintaining these local community brands. Sometimes they might create a regional brand if necessary, but sort of using an icon that's going to be common so that you feel it is still your community hospital, but you also see this connection to a bigger enterprise. And that gives you the sense that there is state-of-the-art care happening here. It's happening at the community level. So it feeds into that story. But absolutely, there are multiple audiences here. There's the patients, and then sort of the broader community that they need to be a part of. Let alone investors and partners and kind of the business audiences that they speak to as well.
So, like the local community hospital, like Reading Community Hospital, will that
Yeah.
keep its name, or it will be Reading Community Hospital, like a member of the LifePoint network, or is it like LifePoint Reading, or there's
No,
probably
it would be it would still be the Reading Community Hospital. There is a new mark that is being introduced at the LifePoint Health corporate level, and the model is that mark would then be the visual identity, the logo would be the same logo used at Reading Community Hospital.
okay. So you start getting that visual identity, and
Right.
then so that does have some impact for the local patient because they start getting the sense that it's part of this professional, larger, bigger, national kind of um, high, modern technological thing. It's not just your local community hospital, but it's plugged into a national system, so you're getting the best care.
Correct. So this is one, and it's sort of top of mind because this is just starting to roll out now. I mean, it will take years, honestly, to roll it through the LifePoint system. Which is, a much slower approach than technology clients that I might work with, or other kinds of companies, just because of um, there's a lot of like kind of physical entities to manage and changing out, and so it just takes time. And a lot of these hospitals have their own boards, the way they're set up. But anyway, I'm getting into the weeds.
So
But that's one model.
so either for this example, or you can give me a sanitized example.
Yeah.
What are the types of discussions that you have and the pushback and the options that are considered when you're going through a process like this? I mean, I'm sure that you didn't just kind of come up with this day one. Everybody says, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do it. There's probably, this whole array of options that you have to consider and then get alignment and input from all sorts of different people and weigh trade-offs. Talk to me about that process.
Yeah, so maybe I'll use that as a chance to talk about another client. And this one, I don't know that I'll identify by name, but a, a often in the technology space, whether it is kind of a software SaaS-based company, in the hardware world, you see it for sure too. But companies often develop either organically or by acquisition. They they have all these different technology products and features of those products. As they develop or as they are acquired, they start to get a name associated with them, and or a little logo associated with them. And so this company in particular, it was an engineering company. They develop kind of the back engine for transportation subway systems around the world. And they had all these different products and technologies that kind of roll into that back end of it's kind of the payment system and the information systems that their customers are the municipalities that are supporting transportation systems. And they had been going to the municipalities with this kind of basket of stuff, but you needed to buy the bigger entity, the bigger contract, in order to be able to get all these additional capabilities and features. And all these capabilities and features were kind of getting in the way of that kind of sales and customer understanding of the products. So that led towards this. That kind of indicated a need to have more of this, BMW approach, right? More of that, kind of single brand to help tell the story. And the challenge in getting from where they were to where they really needed to go was this sense among all these internal product teams of the value that each one of these individual brands had, that thinking that there was so much equity in this individual brand, and just it became a lot of like workshopping and conversations, both with people internally, but then a number of conversations with their clients and their customers, and then feeding that feedback back to the leadership team that your clients are confused. They're not speaking your language. They're not talking about all these brands the way you are. And so help them understand the need to really simplify the way they talk about their portfolio. Again, it's the how they communicate their offerings. So it was about simplifying how they communicate their offerings, and that proved to be extremely successful for them. I mean, I hope I'm sort of coloring it. I'm speaking in sort of vague terms. So I'm hoping like coloring it in reasonably well. But it is. I mean that and the key to doing that was kind of looking at the different potential approaches for them, looking at the implications of you've got approach A, B, or C. What are the pros and cons or implications of each of these approaches? What are we hearing from your customers about which approach would make more sense to them? What are we hearing from your sales teams? Because that is also going to be an important part of the decision, right? Do your sales teams understand the portfolio? can they communicate it appropriately and get people excited about it? Um, and so looking at the trade-offs across a few different models, and ultimately starting to build consensus on to the one that makes the most sense.
Can you give any similar examples that are not sanitized, not necessarily ones that you worked on, where you've seen B2B companies do this sort of simplification or clarification of their architecture?
I've seen one from the outside that I think has just happened. So um, Zoom, the Zoom online meetings, um, they had been trying. So they obviously benefited significantly from the movement to work at home over the last couple of years. Um, and at the same time, we're rolling out all these different kind of what they called products, which to me seem more like capabilities. So they started to brand, and this is a very subtle thing, and I think it is, what they've done has been a significant improvement. Um, so they had their basic Zoom, which I think they called Zoom meetings. But then they also had these other features of like, Zoom meeting rooms and Zoom whiteboard and Zoom phone. I mean, all these things that there were probably like 10 of these kinds of things that all were called Zoom something. It made them feel like a separate, kind of like a separate product. Um, but really, it's just the whiteboard feature in your Zoom meetings, and
Right.
maybe that's part of your, maybe if you have a different tier of a relationship, you can use the whiteboard feature. Um, but by even calling it Zoom whiteboard and marketing it as Zoom whiteboard and Zoom meeting rooms, as opposed to just whiteboard or just meeting rooms, it created this kind of line there on the customer side, and I think it made it a little bit more challenging for them to talk about in the appropriate way and give it the right kind of hierarchy in their discussions to distinguish between Zoom meetings, which is like kind of your main, the core product, and Zoom whiteboard, which you can't use Zoom whiteboard unless you're already using Zoom meetings. So it's really just a feature of Zoom meetings. So that was
it's
one.
like
They have.
it's like the chat feature.
Yeah, right, right.
It's like
It doesn't all need a name, and this is what kind of what keeps me in business is that technology companies like to name a lot of stuff. They just keep naming stuff to the point where somebody at some point raises their hand and says, "Wait a second, this is a problem."
yeah.
Um,
Well, there was
so
probably like a product manager internally who owned that
yeah,
thing, and they called it a product internally. So, and they probably had a
and
working name for it, right?
that's right, and they also, they in one sense you could say that they kind of adhered to that, BMW um, master brand kind of a model by putting Zoom in front of everything. But by putting Zoom in front of everything, you sort of created this issue. Um, and so they have since, I just looked at it recently, and they have since done away with that. So now it's just sort of whiteboard and meeting rooms. And so I think that is, a very subtle, but I think kind of significant improvement.
So for me, one of the takeaways of this discussion is because a lot of listeners are not going to become a brand architecture consultant, but
Right.
but one takeaway that I think, for every listener is to pay attention to the brand architecture and the brands and how they're changing when you're analyzing a market or looking at competitors or looking at your own client, and look at how that changes over time because it gives clues into what the strategy is. So that's the takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think that's right on, and I think that as a business leader, if you're running, if you're leading a business or leading a product group or leading a business, understanding the expectations that you are setting up for your customers in having different, in these different kinds of architecture models. And if your strategy is all about expanding relationships, expanding share wallet, cross selling, then you're going to want to have fewer brands, and that are going to, because that the brands are just going to get in the way of doing all that kind of stuff. And so, understanding that kind of relationship is, for business leaders, is an important step, and I hope that's a takeaway that people have as well.
So, Jonathan Paisner, if folks wanted to follow up with you and either reach out or just kind of keep track of what you're doing, learn more about your firm, where would you point them online?
They can find us at brandexperiencedgroup.com. The company is Brand Experienced. The website is brandexperiencedgroup.com.
All right. And we will include that link in the show notes. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining today. This is a great discussion and opened my eyes to kind of new way of looking at brand architecture.
That's great. Well, thank you, Will, and I hope to speak with you soon.